To understand how I came to do what I do, it's important to know that I grew up in Iowa, where I loved to poke around in the scraps of forest that still remain there. But I decided at a very young age that I wanted to study ecology someplace that's warmer, with more trees, and more interesting plants and animals. And I was just fascinated by what I read about the tropics. After all, tropical forest is a wonderful thing. It's a great place for wild animals to live. It's a great place to conserve the diverse plants that live there. It's a great place to store carbon in. And, there's a vast amount of carbon stored in the trees of a forest. And there's a vast amount of carbon stored in the organic matter of the soil of the forest. But if you chop and burn the forest and plant crops, most of its carbon returns to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, which contributes to global warming. Or on the flip side, take a place that has already been deforested and degraded, and you can plant trees, and as those trees grow, they're going to take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it in their woods, store it in the soil, all the while providing a home for plants and animals. Now that's a win-win situation, right? Now this is the plan for some big global initiatives, such as the Bond Challenge and the Billion Tree Campaign, and not to be outdone by Trillion Trees or the Trillion Tree Campaign and other similar sounding initiatives. All of these programs give us the opportunity to offset the carbon dioxide we emit as we drive and fly and consume. And as such, they promise to be an important tool in our effort to attain carbon neutrality. So let's have a look at some of those places where people are proposing that we reforest the tropics. Now this image shows how much tree cover the climate is able to support. Think of this as the potential forest cover. Now the second image shows us those areas that don't live up to their potential, where there's less tree cover than the climate could support. Now these areas are where you could grow a lot more forest. Now wouldn't it be great to restore this vast area of degraded forest? Well, let's have a look at some of these degraded forests in Africa. Oh, wait a minute. This is degraded forest? No, this is a tropical savanna, which is, as we define, a grassland with a mixture of trees. And what about these degraded forests in Brazil? These grassy ecosystems are chock full of species that are absolutely dependent on the open habitat. They're plants that require sunny habitats, animals that either depend on those plants, or a great many that just simply avoid entering the forest. So let's have a closer look at where we're supposed to plant trees. Most of this potential for reforestation is in regions that are naturally savanna and grassland. But if we plant forests there, then it isn't reforestation at all, it's afforestation. There's a long history of researchers and professionals with a background in forest who view these savannas as degraded forests. And the logic for this is rather simple. If there is enough rain to support a forest, but we don't have forests there, then humans must in some way be responsible for keeping these landscapes open, particularly with their use of fire. My students and I have been studying the role of fire in maintaining these savanna ecosystems in Brazil. And whenever I have funding to do so, I love to involve NC State undergraduate students in this research. Here are some of them who spent a summer doing independent research projects there, and some of which who have published their research in international scientific journals. So, an important aim of this research is to understand what naturally controls where you get savanna and where you get forest, and how this might change in response to climate and in the occurrence of fire. We are currently studying this topic in a large ecosystem experiment to examine the process of forest encroachment at the transition between Brazilian savannas, known as Cerrado, and the Atlantic rainforest. And the site is marked here with a dot. Now, we have set up this experiment at multiple sites where forest is encroaching into native savanna and into grassland. And we're studying the process of encroachment in a series of plots where we continue to suppress fire, and in other plots where we are reintroducing fire to understand its natural role in keeping these forests in check. And we're answering questions such as, what are the impacts of fire and of fire suppression on biological diversity, on carbon stocks, and on the structure of the vegetation? So we're also asking, how do the characteristics of the species present influence which of them thrive under fire suppression and which of them thrive under frequent burning? And the third question that we're examining is, how do the factors such as climate, vegetation, and the plant species present influence flammability? And the answers to these questions point to a really complex dynamic, whereby because of the scarcity of trees in the savanna, those savannas are hotter, they're windier, they're drier than forest, making it more flammable. Even more important are those grasses. Tall grass that dries during the dry season is the perfect fuel for fire. So savannas burn magnificently every few years, which keeps those trees in check. But forests are cooler, they're more humid, and they're too shady to support grass, so they rarely burn. This difference in flammability is so stark that savanna and forest are able to live side by side through the centuries with some give and take at the edges. Except when we humans disrupt this. We clear the forest, or even just disturb it partially by removing a few of the largest and most valuable trees, and now fire can easily enter. If fire enters just once, the forest would eventually recover by itself. But too often, the forest slips into the same dynamic as the savanna, whereby the first fire opens up the degraded forest canopy even more, making it, again, more flammable and increasing the chance that it will burn again in subsequent years. Eventually, grasses take hold, making it very difficult to stop the vicious cycle of fire and degradation, and making it nearly impossible to restore the forest. So it's not surprising that conservationists would see this and opt to suppress all fire. This is what has happened in Brazil and in many other parts of the world, including in the US in the past. So what are the consequences? Well, for one thing, you do get a lot of carbon tied up in the vegetation. This shows the increase in carbon that occurs as savanna gets encroached by forest. And the basal area is just simply a measure of how many trees you have. But as forest encroaches, there's a lot more carbon stored in the plants, and there's a lot more carbon stored in the soil organic matter. Now, this is a good thing, and these are the same benefits that would also be gained by planting a forest. By now, you're expecting a downside. Surely, you do get more tree species as forest expands, but most of the unique plant species in these savannas are the grasses, shrubs, and other small plants. These species are absolutely decimated by forest expansion, and these are the plant species that are under the greatest threat of extinction in these savannas. And the outcome for savanna animals is no better. So we have been successful at encouraging Brazilian researchers to use our experiment to study the consequences of fire suppression for insects, mammals, birds, and reptiles, and they have found that all of these groups of animals include species that disappear when the forest encroaches into savanna. Fortunately, our work has helped convince government agencies in Brazil to take a second look at fire, and they are slowly relaxing restrictions on the use of fire for conservation purposes. This leaves us with a complex problem. Planting forests is a great way to get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and in many situations, planting forests is a win-win situation where both the biological diversity and the climate benefits. But this is not the case over vast areas of the world where there is available land and where there is enough rain to support forests, but where we currently find natural savanna and grassland. Solving wicked problems is not easy. If someone is selling a win-win solution, look closely. There's probably a loser somewhere. In this case, that loser would be the grand biodiversity of tropical savannas. Only by considering what is actually gained and what is truly lost can we hope to solve these wicked problems.